इस्लामाबाद में सदर डॉक्टर आरिफ अलवी का मार्गला डायलॉग के एहतमाम आई, आपको बराह रास्त लिए चले।
Being, there is no 2 plus 2 4 logic in the human mind. Everything is colored by his emotions, by his reactions, by sometimes he may claim an ego or a dignity based on a primordial origin, or based on the fact that taking pride in language or in race or in whatever form, and therefore all arguments therefore are colored by the same. So starting from the Westphalian order, going through the 2 world wars and finally coming to the United Nations, a translation of the reality, the political reality, translation, a pact between the victors and the victors. And what Henry Kissinger once described, there was no consultation with anybody else. It was a pact by the victors for the future times to come. The world has lived through that. The world has lived through a Cold War. And looking at the situation, I have made a claim. And I feel, because your topic was perspectives of the developing world. The perspective was that the developing world was not protected by the arms race. The developing world was, I make a claim, challengeable of course, I make a claim that the United Nations and the world order which originated after 1945 was related to ensure peace in Europe. If you were fighting elsewhere, it was less of a concern. And there were spheres of influences which were described in different areas of the world, and you continued with your sphere of influences. This is the first time in Ukraine it has been challenged. It was challenged in the collapse of Yugoslavia, but at the same time it was decided to ignore whatever atrocities were being committed, considering a primordial reaction to what was happening in the world. So, but the world adjusted. The world adjusted to a bipolar world, and everyone made alliances. There are institutions which were also made, but which may not have lived up to the dreams. For example, non-aligned movement. That was an institution which challenged a bipolar world, which looked at protections, which looked at from the spectacles of the developing world, or people or countries which were not aligned. But as time passed, even those who formed the non-aligned movement, we knew, for example, India, even then it was an aligned state, but it was a founder of the non-aligned movement among the four leaders of the world, Nehru and Sukarno and 2 others. The non-aligned movement is still alive, still kicking. I think from Venezuela to Pakistan, no, not from Venezuela, the leadership went to Azerbaijan. Today is the head of the non-aligned movement. But there was a challenge to the bipolar world. Not a challenge in any sense, but the fact that we also live. We also want to be recognized. We also have rights. So all conventions which were signed, for example, the Geneva Convention, the first challenge to the world order came about when, starting from Tolstoy, who observed war from close range, personally fighting the Russian war, and then describing the fact and getting bitter about the fact that killing people, and then on one day you raise the white flag and you come out and bury people, and the next day the white flag is down, again you get back to killing people. And from there a pacifist movement did start, which wanted no war. But at the same time there was a movement which said there should be a humane war, and which was led by Henry Dunant, for example, who was the founder of the International Red Cross. That was led by him, that there should be laws or humanitarian concerns even while you fight, to be able to how to treat prisoners of war, how to treat injured people, to have ceasefires, etc., etc. And there was a big challenge which has reduced now, of pacifists who wanted no war. So a humane war concept is again around today, by making it more humane by targeted killings, which were illegal until George Bush made himself a statement, I think in 2001 or 2, he made a statement that when Israel was doing targeted killings, he made a statement that this was illegal. But all things are illegal if the others are doing. When it comes into your own hands, all legalities have been changed. All Geneva Conventions have been subverted. For example, the human rights issue. Conventions have established the human dignity and human rights. But then countries, for violating the legal understanding of the world, also established Guantanamo Bay, where the prisoners had no human rights, no rights for defense. Even today, the biggest challenge in the world is that my laws protect my countrymen. There are very, very good laws. Some countries have great laws, but they don't protect other people. So the laws are for citizens. The laws are not for the world. So anyhow, what I was trying to mention is, number one, the bipolar world, the world adjusted to it. But the bipolar world is facing a major challenge. The power base was supposedly with the nation state. But in the last 60, 70 years, after the formation of the United Nations, 75 years or 80 years, after the formation of the United Nations, the power base is going beyond nation state. For example, big politicians appeal to multinationals to give them space, appealing to Twitter to give them space. Prime Minister is looking at Twitter, presidents looking at Twitter, and their judgments are not being made in a democratic manner. Their judgments are being made by their board or by individuals. That's a big challenge. The ability to create violence. In fact, today a Bloomberg report has come out, which I was reading, that the incident of Hindu-Muslim conflict in Leicester, in England, was irritated and inflamed more by about 200 accounts which were on Meta, 200 accounts which were not even from that city. So the fact that these multinational strengths are coming up, but this is not new. You remember, we, the developing world, we, the suffering world, we were the poor world, we thought that one of the reasons why the Middle East was in conflict was because of the natural resources in the Middle East, which was oil. So therefore, the cover given to exploitation from the blatant war, plunder regimes in the medieval ages to the colonial regimes of the 17th and 18th century, where violence didn't matter as long as it was done to the savages. Savages had no right. In fact, you look at some US presidents, you look at European leaders talking about the savages of Africa and the savages of the Red Indians, that the principles of war do not apply to savages. Because savages do this, therefore they don't deserve those kind of rights. The King of Belgium was responsible for a massacre in Congo, for example. 10 million people, who some of them, just for the production of rubber. And if the quota was not met, the people's arms were cut off just to make sure that they fulfill the production of quota. So do we have confidence in human thought? Things are changing. There are people who have made observations that a war which can kill more than 10 million people is a matter which happens once in a century. And the longest term of peace has been about 70, 80 years before big powers are not in conflict. So I am challenging the international order, the developing countries. I will come to the solutions for the developing countries later. It is very easy to be able to challenge it, but whether they will listen, that's a different story. Therefore, we'll be talking about individuals. We'll be talking about a new era in which world cooperation can take place, and the need for that. The need for that is not only the fact that we want peace. The need for that is other issues like global warming, the fact that social media, the fact that the world is being challenged by technological developments, and whether the systems are fossilized, whether the systems we have the flexibility, or whether we have to develop an understanding for newer systems. That's the thinking which we have to look at. there are 5 levels of causes and which can be looked at, and all those levels are important. One is the individual level. The psychology of the head of state is always important, and the world focuses on psychology of the head of state. Sometimes it is a brutal reactive psychology, sometimes it is a very cooperative psychology, sometimes it's an isolationist psychology, sometimes it becomes very ethnic in the sense that we have to, this country, this race, this white race or black race or the Hindu race has to establish its strength in the world. So that's psychology of leaders. And I don't have to name leaders. You can, in all my descriptions, you can fit a leader in one of these descriptions, which leader I am talking about. So psychology of individuals matters. That's why the world looks at to steer that country or this country where, in which manner. Then there is a sub-state level of consultation, which is, for example, cabinets, parliaments, advisors within the government, and those are also important. The military establishment, for example, in some countries. All these are important factors, and these factors, the leadership at that level is also important. Pakistan today, unfortunately, is at a confusion at a number of levels. So what I talk about first is for the developing countries to look at, and at the same time, I have specific targets for my own country. That's how I start. That's how I start looking at it. There is in my thinking, there is always a circle of my concern, which is huge. My concern goes to global warming. My concern goes to many things. But as the president of Pakistan, for example, or beyond an individual, my concerns, there's a narrower circle of my influence. So I have to narrow down my concerns. As far as concerns are concerned, I can talk to you. I can verbalize our thoughts, but those are academic thoughts. But when I talk about the circle of influence, I mean the circle of influence of my parliaments, of our advisors, of our think tanks, of our leaders, therefore, and of the country, where we can influence. All of you are the circle of influence which can be charged to do what you want to do. Then the conflict is of state, of countries, their attitudes, and there's a momentum in states. There's a momentum, directional momentum of India, for example, for no peace attitude as far as Pakistan is concerned. So there's a momentum of states which has to be looked at. Then, as far as solutions are concerned, there's a bilateral level of trying to come to a solution. That's what we have been trying, to come to solutions on all our borders, everywhere. That's a bilateral level of solution. Bilateral level of cooperation, for example, with China, for example, with the United States of America. Those are, for example, with the European Union. Those are bilateral. For example, with Turkey, those are bilateral approaches of bilateral understanding.
इस्लामाबाद में डॉक्टर आरिफ अलवी मार्गला डायलॉग के इख्तितामी सेशन से खिताब कर रहे थे और उन्होंने कहा कि दुनिया में तेजी से तब्दीलियां रूनुमा हो रही हैं। उनका मजीद कहना था कि तनाज़ात के बायस दुनिया में तफरीक हो रही है। दूसरी जंग अजीम के बाद इक़वाम मुत्तहिदा का क़याम अमल में आया। उन्होंने मजीद कहा कि इक़वाम मुत्तहिदा के क़याम का मकसद आलमी अमन को यकीनी बनाना है।